Good evening. I'd like to call our regular business meeting to order. I know you're all excited to be here, just like I am, but let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to ask our controller, Mr. McCammon, to call the roll.
President Baker.
Present?
Mr. Brown. Here. Vice President Cole. Ms. Gibbs. Ms. Hudson. Mr. Peretti. Ms. Reyes. Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you. And I would like Chris Ward, who is our Director of Safety and Security, to come to the podium. And while he makes his way to the front, I'd like to take a moment to remind everyone that September 11th is a week away, Patriot Day, as we now call it. While that day holds specific meaning and reflection for all of us, it has also been designated as Ohio Public Safety Employee Day. We're blessed here at Columbus City Schools to have a talented and dedicated team of professionals in safety and security led by Chris Ward, who work hard to keep our students and staff safe every day. Through their efforts, we are truly able to be ready for success. Thank you, Director Ward. I'm going to ask you to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, but I do want to ask that you offer our sincerest gratitude to all of your staff. Everyone, please be upstanding for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ward. And to any of our safety and security staff who are here tonight, thank you for your service. At this time, because our treasurer is absent, the board is required to appoint a treasurer pro tem, and I would like to ask for a motion to appoint a treasurer pro tem.
Motion to appoint Board Member Reyes. I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Board Member Reyes, are you willing?
Sure.
Very well then. Mr. McCammon?
President Baker.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Mr. Peretti.
Yes.
Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. I'd like to briefly read through the agenda so we all know the work before us this evening. After we adopt our agenda, we will take public comment if we have any. I don't believe we do. We will then hear from our interim superintendent, Dr. Stanford, after which we will hear from our internal auditor. We'll hear from the Office of the Treasurer, then take up our consent agenda, after which we will hear announcements and points of pride from board members. The board will then recess into executive session, and we will adjourn from that executive session without returning to these chambers. Having said that, is there a motion that we adopt the agenda as presented?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Mr. McCammon, please note the arrival of Vice President Cole and call the roll.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Vice President Cole.
Yes.
Mr. Peretti.
Yes.
Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
President Baker.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. I do not believe we have any speakers this evening. We do not. So we'll move on then to item number 5. And I'm going to call on Dr. Stanford to provide us with the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Board of Education. During tonight's board meeting, we will focus most of our attention on the operations of our district, the ways we ensure that our buildings run as efficiently and as effectively as possible. In a moment, I'll also touch upon our Beat the Heat protocols aimed at keeping our students and our staff safe from the persistent hot temperatures and high humidity that we are experiencing right now. And I want to emphasize to the board and to the listening audience and those who are in attendance that it is a combination of the heat and the humidity that is causing the problem for our students and our staffs in the buildings right now. But I feel obligated tonight to begin my comments on a more somber yet urgent subject. As many of you know, this past weekend, when most people in our community agonized over the heat or the sudden rains, there was one family, one of our families in Columbus City Schools, who laid to rest their 15-year-old daughter and friend, a young woman whose life held so much great potential and promise, a life that was ended far too early by something that this community should be able to prevent, and that is gun violence. Tamara Dotson was an outspoken 8th grader at Champion Middle School, but her voice was silenced by a bullet, allegedly during an argument, a senseless argument, making her our city's 71st homicide this year. As she was laid to rest, another family, another one of our CCS families, is grieving over how their child could have made such a mistake that lasted just a few seconds, but will have an impact on the rest of his life. The specific circumstances behind Tamara's death are still to be determined by our police department and a court of law. But in the end, it boils down to one simple thing: a gun in the hand of a young person. When we launched the Safer Together campaign last spring, when every school took pause to prioritize the lessons of safety, respect, and kindness across our district, we emphasized quite clearly that our school community is safer when all of us work together to prioritize safety, when we all act together to protect one another, and when we all speak out together as one about the need to end gun violence. But time has passed. This doesn't just apply to the 7 or so hours that our young people are in our schools and under our care. Being safer together, as we talked about in the spring, applies every hour, every second, every minute, and every time the safety of a young person in this community is put at risk. Tonight, let me use my time to send a very personal message to all of our students, all of our families, and quite frankly, to every young man and young woman who calls Columbus home. At no time, no place, no circumstances should you as a young person have a gun in your hands for any reason. The madness over teens and guns must come to an end, and it must come to an end right now. I am proud of our safety and security teams, as I am proud of the Columbus Police Division and the school resource officers that are in our schools. Along with our building administrators and staff, they do an incredible job each day, as Board President Baker emphasized in his remarks, to keep weapons out of our schools, but more importantly, they use the relationships that they build with our kids on a daily basis to keep them safe. But like a horrific image that is a constant repeat in our nation's conscience, we continue to see far too many cases of young people out in the neighborhood, often late at night, whose rash actions with a gun lead to deadly consequences, not only for themselves, but all those around them as well. If you are a young person listening to this message, whether you are in Columbus City Schools or another school district, and you think you need a gun at home to be safe, in your neighborhoods to be safe, or to fit in, or to represent because you think it's keeping it real by having a gun, then you need to stop whatever it is you are doing right now and rethink where your life is going and where you are taking yourself by keeping a gun in your possession. Enough is enough. No more guns. It is time for us to make a change, and it's time to make a change right now, this very instant. If that's you that I've described as a young person, then tomorrow morning I am asking you, I am pleading with you to talk to your principal, your pastor, your closest family member, or the one caring adult who you most trust, and tell them why. Why is it so important for you to carry a gun? Tell that person why it is important for you to feel like it makes you a bigger person to have a gun. And I am calling on the adults in this community to listen closely to these young people, to care deeply about them, and then to take whatever action is necessary to convince that young person to put the gun down permanently, and to get them to understand that a life is too precious to lose in such a senseless way. If you're a young person who doesn't feel you have an adult to talk to, then I want you to make an important phone call. You can either call the anonymous 24-hour-a-day hotline that we have set up with the state of Ohio, a part as our Safer Together campaign. That number is easy to remember. It is 1-844-SAFER-OH. Again, 1-844-SAFER-OH. Or you can call me through our customer service office. The helpline there is 614-365-5888, and I guarantee you that that message will get to me and I will get a hold of you. These numbers work for everyone in our community, whether you are a family member or a friend, a concerned citizen or a watchful neighbor that cares about their neighborhood. Call 844-SAFEROH and share your information with those individuals. We have said this all year in 2018. We are truly safer together in this community when we work together. But to be safer demands that all of us be in this effort together. For all of our young people, for the future of this community, and for the memory of Tamara Dotson, our young people are depending on us. We owe it to them because people did it for us when we were their age. We have to help them through these difficult, tough times that they are experiencing and help them understand that a life is too precious to have taken in this type of way. Now, there is no easy transition from this message, but let me move on to our next pressing matter of business today. Yes, sir.
I appreciate those words, and I did want to offer my colleagues a brief opportunity perhaps to add their own comments. Mr. Brown?
Thank you. There's been lots of talk, and it's certainly a time for action. What we can do tonight, I think this board, I would move that we endorse and adopt your statement, and then move from there to determine ways in which we can act on that to improve the situation, at least in our community, if we can't do that beyond. We do have to focus on our community. It's an appalling situation. I've seen it throughout my career in so many different ways. And you're absolutely right. So thank you for the comments. I, as I say, I would move to endorse and adopt that as a statement of the board.
Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Brown. So Mr. Brown is suggesting that the board adopt the statement that the superintendent just made relative to gun violence. And
Second.
moved and seconded. All right. Okay. Other comments, colleagues? All right. General Counsel, is there any reason the board would not be able to adopt that this evening?
President Baker, I believe that the board can vote on that motion. It's on the floor, ready for a vote.
Very well then, thank you. Colleagues, any other comments? Mr. Preddy?
I agree that adopting the statement, maybe we could add a piece where we can allow community members to sort of weigh in, some sort of email just to give us feedback and, how we can gather ideas and things like that. I think is always a good idea. Some sort of inclusive piece that allows the community to give us feedback.
Right. All right. Seeing nothing else, Mr. McCammon, if you wouldn't mind.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes.
Mr. Peretti?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. And Superintendent, would you provide that verbiage to the controller so that it can be included in the formal record of the meeting?
Yes, sir, I absolutely can. And to the members of the Board of Education, thank you. Because it is time to stop the talk. It is time for us to take action, and we need to do something to save our babies. So I appreciate what you have done tonight.
And for those in our community, and there are many, who want to talk about their Second Amendment rights, this isn't about
It is not.
rights. Just because you have a right to do something doesn't make it smart.
Exactly.
And it's deadly and stupid.
Okay. Thank you again.
Yes, sir.
Members of the Board of Education.
Please
Appreciate it.
continue.
Tomorrow, as some of you already know, Columbus City Schools will be taking the historic step of canceling classes because of the prolonged hot temperatures and humidity. We do not take this decision lightly. There are a number of different factors that the leadership team and I take into consideration, whether it's to close school or whether it is to have an early release. There are a number of factors that we have to weigh in making those decisions. First and foremost in making those decisions is the safety of our students and the staff. We put them first, as we should. At our schools, only the administrators and custodial teams will report for work. Teachers, secretaries, and school-based staff will not report to work. And let me emphasize this point as well, because there seems to be some confusion. This is not a calamity day. We are closing schools. Calamity day has a technical definition for it, and we are not calling this a calamity day. We are closing schools, yes, but this is not a calamity day. Non-school-based employees and bus drivers will still report as scheduled. At our high schools, we will still have athletics and after-school activities at the principal and coach's discretion. But all other school activities at our elementary and middle schools are canceled for tomorrow. And if you're thinking about athletic events, those are canceled as well. For the 42 buildings in our district that do not have air conditioning, the greatest challenge is not just the hot temperatures during the day, but how hot and humid it stays until the evening. As we've been watching over these last couple of weeks, the temperature has been in the 90s. But with the humidity, it feels like 99, 100 degrees, 101. And then you walk into one of our classrooms that has not had the opportunity to cool down because it's been 77 degrees all night. It could be temperatures higher than that in a classroom. Our schools simply cannot cool off at night because of the high temperatures over the evening. Classrooms start the day in the 80s and often end the day, even when we have an early release day, in the high 90s or hotter. Our partners at City Hall have stepped up to help us. They have opened their rec centers early and offering programs into the evening. And I just want to say thank you to Mayor Ginther and to Director Johnson for the support. As we all know, it is better when our kids have supervised activities that will keep them engaged when they're not in school. I also want to compliment our academic and operations teams, as well as our employee associations and unions, for working with us on these difficult decisions. Together, we have implemented our Beat the Heat efforts without pause, putting student and staff safety first and foremost. We have partnered together with our parents to deal with this difficult time. I also appreciate the kind words we've received from our families who understand the struggle our district faces when a third of our schools still do not have building-wide air conditioning, and they understand that making these type of decisions aren't easy because of our great diversity across our school district. I went to a couple of schools this afternoon to see for myself what type of pressures and what type of situations that our teachers are experiencing with our students. I talked to them. They told me that, yes, when they walked in this morning, the temperature was already at 90 degrees in these elementary schools. And it escalated from there to, by the time I walked in, it was at 100, 101, 102 degrees. And that's unacceptable. That is unacceptable. So tomorrow afternoon, we will make another decision about Thursday, because unfortunately, the temperatures may not be that much better tomorrow, on Thursday. We hope there will be a break in the forecast and that there will be a break soon. To keep our families and staff informed, we highly encourage you to download the Columbus City Schools mobile app. It is the best way and the quickest way to find out what is going on in this district. It is the first place that we post our decisions on delays and cancellations. The lack of air conditioning in our legacy buildings is a good segue into the final topic for this evening's report, and that is our presentation to the Board of Education on the draft recommendations from our community-led facilities task force. And let me say, before I introduce the co-chairs of the task force and the two staff members that have been providing great leadership and facilitation to this work, that this committee has done a fabulous job of going through a tremendous amount of data and information in such a short time period, and really staying engaged in the process and asking the tough questions of our team about the data and about the scenarios that was presented to them. At this time, I'm going to ask the two community co-chairs of the task force to come to the podium. And as they walk up, Ms. Perry Sabbatee and Mr. Jim Negron, let me just share a little background work on the task force. And as I mentioned, the two staff members that have led the internal work and has worked with these co-chairs throughout this entire process, our Chief of Staff, Maria Stockert, and our Director of Capital Improvements, Alex Trevino, and both of them are here tonight. If they don't mind standing and just receiving a quick round of applause for the great work. And if the other members of the task force internal team are here, I'd like you to stand up as well to be recognized, please. And last but not least, I know there are some members of the task force who are able to make this meeting with us. With those individuals, please stand up as well and be recognized. As you recall, members of the board, this task force is comprised of volunteers representing our families, our neighborhoods, and our business stakeholders, and our association members internal to the organization. You charge them with reviewing data and making recommendations on schools and administrative buildings for closing or for changing attendance boundaries or grade configurations, with recommendations based on an overall balance and objectivity of factors listed in Board Policy 7105. As I mentioned, over the past 4 months, these community members, working with our internal team, have been presented with qualitative and quantitative data on the impact of potential changes as prepared by, again, 2 district-led expert work teams led by Maria Stockert, our Chief of Staff, and Alex Trevino, our Director of Capital Improvements. Tonight, our co-chairs and district staff present to you, board members, the draft recommendations approved by the Facilities Task Force last week. These preliminary recommendations attempt to address a combination of challenges and opportunities, and I want to emphasize that, and opportunities for our students and for this community at several of our buildings. Again, I want to thank Jim and Perry, Maria and Alex for their leadership on this work. This work is far from done. This is only the beginning stages. These recommendations after tonight will go out to the community as a whole for even more feedback from the community. And so with that, I will turn it over to Jim and Perry. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Dr. Stanford. Chairman Baker, board members, on behalf of my co-chair and the rest of our task force committee, we actually were excited about being here. Because honestly, there's nothing more important you can do than look out for the health and wellness of our public school system. And I've said this time and time again, a community cannot grow in a healthy manner without a public school system. And there are some incredible people that we work with on this journey. As Dr. Stanford said, we've been working on this for about 4 or 5 months, and there was healthy tension in the process. You know, there's no way that the group is going to agree on everything. But what most important is we depended on data provided to us by places, people like MORPC, GSA, the OFCC, and then so many hours put in by the public schools system staff. And some of the things that the task force challenged the staff with, you know, the residential demographic changes that MORPC has put out, the lottery waiting list, work orders, internal work orders, and the grade band designs. All of this data was put into the process, trying to make sure that we evaluated and vetted out what the recommendations that we're going to set forth with you. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to my co-chair, Pari.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. What Jim just mentioned, the attributes he just mentioned, like lottery waiting lists, famous work orders, backlog, and that kind of thing, were some additional criteria that we added to the board's mandatory Phase 2 criteria because we were allowed the ability to do that. So I want to thank the board for your providing us the opportunity to do this work. It's been a tremendous 4 months. We have had an absolutely amazing committee that has really participated very broadly in the discussions and brought many of our recommendations and our thoughts back to their communities and brought back to the conversation in a very rich way their observations. One of the things that I wanted to do before we get into the draft recommendations is put this in context in terms of some of the things you will not see on the slides, but was extraordinarily important as part of our discussions and deliberations. And this is in the form of what we called in shorthand words of wisdom. So as we've gone through this for 4 months and spent time looking at the data, some of the things that we as a group really thought was very important for you folks to bear in mind as you deliberate and consider what is before you. The first is, as Jim indicated, our most important task was to focus on what we believed was best for students and to focus on the academic benefits to students, as well as focusing on everyone who works in schools and on student services, the adequacy of those services, and on staffing buildings with experts that can support student success. So with that, you will see in our recommendations recommendations that will have an impact, for example, on special education classrooms, the distribution of those, as well as on diversity. Please understand those are issues that we took into account in our discussions. There will be adjustments and change needed, but we believe that our recommendations weighed those factors correctly. Secondly, as Jim pointed out, looking at anticipated growth. one of the areas that we really focused on was, where is growth not happening today? Where is growth happening 5 or 10 years from now? And how old are the children that will be in those wards or those district areas, in those school boundaries at that time? And for that reason, I do want to point out that MORPC was incredibly helpful in providing us forecast data by school district boundary as closely as they could get it, to actually enrich our discussion beyond what the district has been able to do to date. And I encourage you to continue to have that partnership enrich the capability of the school district to do this kind of work from an analytic point of view. Thirdly, some of our options actually, while they do require a significant and dramatic change, they do also provide access for some students to additional athletic, theater, and art facilities, which is incredibly important, as we know, to a well-balanced education. Fourth area, ESL families. One of the best pieces of information that I received was that we manage 104 different languages in this school district, and so support for ESL families is incredibly important, and support for the staff in the school building that has to deal with ESL families, particularly parents that may not speak English as a primary language and are relying on their children to translate for them, which provides a tremendous burden on school support staff in dealing with that situation. Another area to focus on is in some of our administrative recommendations, which were undertaken for the first time by this group, was to consider the impact of those changes on not just staffing, but also on providing adequate parking for staff that is doing things like driving buses and that kind of thing. Next area is some of the recommended closures affect existing vacant buildings from previous rounds of this exercise. And one of the areas that people were very concerned about, particularly in two neighborhoods in Linden and on the south side, is where there are multiple changes required, that we really consider the impact to the community fabric itself of the closure of these institutions that are very important to neighborhoods. Okay. Lastly, one of the areas that we worked in, this isn't actually last, one of the areas that many people were concerned about was around work that has already been done around the facility master plan, Operation Fix-It, the allocation effort that all of you undergo when you're doing the school budget, and everything else. In particular, I would like to raise up the issue of cause as one of several schools that are in deep need of addressing very difficult facility situations. And honestly, this Beat the Heat event should bring this home to us. There are deep needs that need to be addressed and won't be addressed by a facilities task force that is looking at moving boundaries. This is much more profound than that. I know the FMP process has outlined a long-term plan to address this, but clearly resources are needed to address these critical issues. And it could be resources from anywhere. We often talk about a bond issue. Perhaps there are other sources of funding for such a thing. And then finally, and I want to close with this because it is about what's important to our students, thinking about very carefully about how we review the terminology of what we are doing. And you will see this reflected very carefully in the presentation that's before you. That we think about our recommendations as combining high schools and upgrading middle schools, and that we think about how we are naming those high schools in such a way that we are we are cherishing, respecting, and maintaining the history of both schools. This is critically important. The district was very kind to give us a briefing about how they handle these decisions in terms of helping students make the transition, but we think that's tremendously important, as well as paying attention to storing and making accessible memorabilia to some of these schools that have a long and storied past. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, not Eric, to Scott. Are you doing the presentation? Okay. Have I forgotten anything?
Nope, got it.
Have we recognized all of the committee members that are here? Thank you. Have I missed anything? Okay, great. Thank you very much, everyone.
President Baker, members of the board, I've been fortunate to work with the task force as kind of a facilitator at many of the meetings, and asked tonight to put their 5 months of work into just a few minutes so that we can kind of give you a sense of all that was talked about. Every one of the meetings started with this slide in which we reminded everyone, yes ma'am, you do. And all of this information is available online. I'm sorry, Ms. Gibbs, you may not have this specific presentation, but you'll have elements of it, so we will make sure that you have it. Each of our task force meetings started with this slide that reminded everyone of the roles that everyone played in the room, looking at the task force members, reminding them that you and the interim superintendent had charged them with reviewing the data and making the recommendations that had a statement of rationale and that were built upon the board policies that you put in place. It was our internal team then that was responsible for providing that qualitative and quantitative data, sharing our the expert opinions and thoughts that our team has, and giving them an opportunity to understand the district atmosphere and environment, as well as provide an opportunity for public input. This task force went through a pretty thorough calendar so far, but as Dr. Stanford shared, there's much work to be done. You will see the meetings that this task force has already accomplished, recognizing that we still have work to do in September and October. As you heard talk about, the criteria that we looked at for all of our buildings, all 110 schools, all of our administrative sites, began with information that was in board policy. We started with our school sites looking at 4 important data points, that being student enrollment, building utilization, the condition of our buildings, as well as the transfer in and transfer out rates. From there, we moved on to a phase 2 criteria that looked at a number of elements, everything from accessibility in a building, its ability to accommodate district-wide events, to looking at the lottery wait list, our MORPC data on residential trends, even looking at grade band design and the favorable response that we heard in the FMP process to restoring our traditional grade banding, which had pre-K through 5 in elementary, 6 through 8 in middle school, and 9 through 12 in our high schools. Finally, when we looked at the school sites, we looked at impact. We wanted to make sure that the decisions that were recommended by this task force, we had a best understanding on what that impact would be to our students and families, what that impact might be to other schools, the burden that it might place on them, what might be the academic opportunities that would be provided our students depending upon the recommendations of the task force. Very similarly, we did the same thing with the administrative sites, again, starting looking at how we utilize our administrative sites, looking at the market value of property versus what the cost might be to replace or repair some of the elements within those buildings, looking at the condition of our administrative sites, and even looking at whether or not they were designed for the purposes that they served. Then we started to look at additional criteria on the functionality, the future use of that property, even the productivity levels for our employees and our organization, and finally looking at impact on those administrative sites. Depending upon the changes, would we be able to continue operations, and what impact might that be? Could we really relocate buildings simply, or would it take a much more complex action? So with that, let me quickly go through the recommendations that were put forward by the task force at their last meeting. All of this information is on our website, so individuals who have more deeper questions about what these proposals mean, they can go to the website and look kind of deep down into each proposal and offer feedback. So let me begin with the first recommendation for our schools. This is about changing attendance boundaries. for Highland Elementary, West Broad Elementary, and Westgate Elementary. The goal here is to better balance student enrollment and building utilization, as well as improve safe access to both of these buildings. Let me show you on the map. As you can see, there are 2 catchment zones that are south of Broad Street. Those require students to cross a very busy Broad Street. Broad Street is also a pretty full building. So under this plan, by redrawing the attendance boundaries, you see that there are 2 catchment zones that move over to Highland Elementary, a building that has received some of our Operation Fix-It dollars, is in good condition. The others, on the other side of Hague, go to Westgate Elementary. Again, much safer, so they don't have to cross busy Broad Street or busy Hague. And then that also kind of balances our enrollment across those 3 buildings. Recommendation number 2 is another attendance boundary change. Here we have North Linden Elementary, which is over capacity, and Mays Elementary, which is under capacity. And so the proposal here is to adjust that attendance boundary to balance out those 2 attendance areas. We also note, and you can see that this is 2 catchment zones, one of which is mostly commercial and does not have any students living in it. The other, we note that part of this may require an additional ESL unit be placed at Mays, which is a good thing. Again, as you heard from our co-chairs, but are able to assist our families, our new American families in that area, and better serve both communities. Let me move on to the 3rd recommendation. Now we start to get a little more complex. This recommendation looks at our North High School building. So in this one, the proposal is to relocate the 9-12 grades, the 9th through 12th grades from our Columbus North International program down to Brookhaven so that they can collate with the Columbus Global Academy. You'll recall that this was a recommendation that came out of the FMP process, received great favorable input from our FMP, as well as input that we've heard through the community. This would allow both of those schools to work together, and in fact, we might even offer students at the Global Academy a reservation in the international program if they choose not to go back to their high school. With then the North High School building open, the proposal by the task force is to move Dominion Middle School, which in their current building now sits at 120% utilization. It's a packed building, and moving that group into the North High School. At the same time that you'd still have those 7th and 8th graders that were in the international program staying there, so they would be part of an expanded Dominion program. This would be a unique opportunity for the staff and families at Dominion to kind of rethink their program to include a language immersion or a specialized language program. So not only would it encapsulate those international students that are there, but would also give us a unique opportunity to have a dedicated middle school pathway for our current language immersion programs, it's Spanish immersion and Ecole Kenwood, as well as our Mandarin program that's currently ongoing at Hubbard Mastery. So we would move the 6th grades from those buildings. Now that's a pretty complex idea to create this, what we've often called the Dominion Plus idea. And so for this proposal, we propose it not being implemented until the 2021 school year. Whereas the other proposals are to take place next year, this would be a 2-year implementation process. I won't try to go through all those fine points, I covered many of them, but I want you to see this map, because I think what's important on this map is to see that the North High School is within the Dominion boundary. That asking our students to go just a little south into international is not a major. It's already in that neighborhood. So I think you can see, and again, Dominion is a very crowded school, and this would allow us to fill North High School with a unique middle school opportunity and give our middle school students a true middle school experience for those that are currently in our immersion programs. Let me move to our next one. Now we take a look at the south side of town. This is a recommendation by the task force that impacts 13 different schools on the south side. Let me try to go through this. What we do is we look at Marion Franklin. That is currently a building that has a 53% utilization rate. We convert Marion Franklin High School into Marion Franklin Middle School. So we take those high school students, we move them to South High School. South High School, you know, is currently a 7-12 building, so we turn South High School back into a traditional 9-12 high school. Buckeye Middle School then closes. Those students who went to Buckeye would instead now go to this new Marion Franklin Middle School. Also in that middle school then are those 7th and 8th graders from South High School. At the same time in that neighborhood, the schools that feed into South High School are currently K-6s. Again, we want to give more of our middle school students that true middle school experience, not having 6th graders treated like elementary students. So you would take all of those 6th graders out of those elementary schools and put them into this new Marion Franklin Middle School. With that adjustment, we would also propose that Siebert Elementary, which has very few students who actually live in that neighborhood and attend that school, we would be able to close Siebert Elementary and then divide those students among Stewart Elementary and Southwood Elementary, both of which are new buildings. So again, this is a pretty ambitious plan. I won't go through all of the points to consider, but this gives you a sense of what the new feeder pattern would look like. You would now have 7 elementary schools feeding into this Marion Franklin Middle School, taking care of the utilization issues there. You would transform South High School into a traditional 9-12 high school, something that we heard very positive feedback from our community during the FMP process. And we would be also able to address the building challenges at Siebert by putting those students into newer buildings. Let me just make sure on the map you can kind of see what the new south side feeder zone would look like as we move students into South High School and out of Buckeye Middle School. This is a closer look at the current Siebert attendance boundary. So the light green area is the current Siebert attendance boundary. Again, very few students actually live in that neighborhood who attend Siebert. We would instead have those directed to either Stewart or Southwood. And that would allow us to close Siebert, an older building. Finally, on the school side, let me go through then a reorganization of our East Side and Linden area schools. Very similarly, we look at Linden McKinley STEM Academy, which has a low utilization rate, and we convert that into a middle school program. So we move the 9th through 12th grades that are currently there. As you know, it's a 7-12 building. We move those 9th through 12th grades to East High School. So that changes the East High School feeder pattern to now include that Linden McKinley Middle School. We also then propose, similarly to what we did on the south side, that anywhere where there are elementaries where they have that 6th grade, that extra 6th grade, we move those to this new Linden McKinley Middle School. Again, now starting to really fill up Linden McKinley Middle School. At the same time, we also propose moving ESL units that are currently housed in Medina and Mifflin Middle Schools, moving those to that newer space that's in Linden McKinley, in this new Linden McKinley Middle School. By doing that, that actually allows us to combine the enrollments at Medina and Mifflin and close one of those buildings. I won't go through all the details other than to say that, again, this is a pretty complex one because, as you know, East High School is currently part of our OSU Health Sciences Academies, and we'd want to really work with that school to build in the STEM program that has really gained momentum through the Linden McKinley so that we really have a robust East program that balances both. But this is a look at what the feeder pattern would change to. So you have East High School now being fed by 2 middle schools. Again, an ability to address the underutilization at East High School. We also have 4 elementaries that feed into the new Linden McKinley Middle School and allows us to provide a true middle school experience for those students. It also provides a dedicated middle school athletic space because of Linden McKinley. It also allows us to preserve the pride that both of those neighborhoods have in those schools by maintaining both the East Building and the Linden McKinley Building. This map just starts to show you some of this where this new feeder pattern, where the catchment would be for both a combined Linden McKinley East feeder pattern. This is just a closer look at those elementary schools that currently have the K-6, that this would allow us to move those sixth graders out, provide additional space, and perhaps even add pre-kindergarten space as funds come available. And finally, this is that closer look at the Medina and Mifflin Middle School option. By moving those ESL units out into newer facility space that's available in Linda McKinley, not only are we filling Linda McKinley, we're giving that new space for that ESL program, keeping it within that neighborhood. It does provide an opportunity then to move students out of Mifflin Middle School into Medina, Mifflin having challenges in the facility, and putting everyone into Medina and closing Mifflin. Let me quickly go through the administrative site recommendations. This is really broken up into three basic categories as we look at some of our administrative sites. The first group are those that that the task force calls for immediately closing. To immediately close over the next year and a half or so to move existing programming and operations out of the Morris Road bus compound, the former Beery Middle School, which is currently the Marion Franklin Opportunity Center, and the Adult Education Center on Lexington Avenue, and that would allow us to close all three of those buildings. As you know, the Morris Road property is a pretty valuable property, currently appraised at about $5.8 million, but does have about $1.5 million in some major system replacement costs that we could see over the near future. We would be able to absorb those buses in our current transportation centers. The Beery Middle School is a really, truly underutilized building in which we only have one current CCS staff member. It does serve a number of community programs, which the district could work with those to help relocate and find other space. It would allow us to close that building. And the Adult Education Center, again, here's a situation where we have a former elementary school that is being used to teach adults. And so the facility definitely does not match what it's currently being used for. We could look at, again, finding other places for those classes throughout current district space. The next set of administrative site recommendations are about relocating. This takes a little more time, but needing to identify a plan to relocate operations out of these three locations and put them into newer space that better accommodates the functions that they serve. And this might include the new Southland facility, 3700 South High Street, or other school sites. Those three sites being the Linmore Education Center, which, as you know, is an older building. Those functions could be relocated to a newer facility, much of it office space. There's the 17th Avenue facility, which again could be relocated if we had a more appropriate space for it. And the property there does have a value, a significant value, being near the fairgrounds. And the same with the Hudson Distribution Center. Now, we'd have to take some time to figure out where you'd be able to put the distribution part of that center and the warehousing part. But again, there would be, with enough planning and time, an ability to move that site. And finally, the last group of the administrative site recommendations. These are ones that need some additional study that the task force recommends that we take a little more time because the complexity is much higher. That we really need to take a closer look at the feasibility cost and where might you even relocate these buildings. And that would be the CEC building that we're in now, as well as 5th and 6th. The Food Production Center, which is a very unique function, not something that we can just shut down in one day and wait until it's rebuilt to start again. Food needs to be served every day. Our Fort Hays Transportation Compound, a place that does have future use as part of the FMP as a location for a potential elementary, but that's not something that we could cross right away. That's something that's going to have to take a lot of time and take care of those complex issues about moving that. And finally, the Kingswood Data Center. Data centers are not something that you can simply move overnight, and we should take time to study that, is what the task force recommended. So again, that's a very quick look at the different recommendations. Let me just close by sharing with you that we are dedicated to making sure that the community has continued opportunity to weigh in on this. The community was a part of the task force already, and now we want the greater community to have an opportunity by sharing information online, through our mobile app, on the phone, through email, regular mail, and in person. There are a series of community meetings set up over the next 2 weeks on the 10th, the 11th, the 13th, and the 20th. We've already started, as I shared, post this information online. There's a link on the mobile app that allows you to go right to that information. We will be launching a survey tomorrow that allows people to share information. If they don't want to email in, they can just go through the survey. You can even call our Office of Customer Relations, email us at the talktous@columbus.k12.oh.us email. And finally, for those who still like to write a good letter, we provide the mailing address. And so with that, I will turn it back over to our co-chairs to provide more information.
I didn't know what other information we're supposed to provide, except to say the staff did a terrific job. And so did each of our chair members. But we're happy to entertain questions if you have any.
Very much. Thank you all for the presentations. Nice to see Jimmy Negron here, one of my favorite people. Looking very svelte, by the way, I noticed. And Perry Sabity, thank you for your leadership on this as well. So I do know that I have a number of colleagues here who do have questions. I do also know that handed to me late was a speaker slip. So this individual was here in time, did sign up in time, and his comments relate to this particular topic. And so colleagues, do you think it appropriate to hear from this speaker now? He has waited longer than he probably anticipated. So if no one objects, I'd like to invite Mr. Rodney Kent to the podium. Mr. Kent, thank you for your patience. Topic of your comments, merging of Lyndon McKinley and East High School. Board action requested. Board to acknowledge that the merging of the high schools would be an opposition and a safety issue. Mr. Kent, good evening.
Good evening to, as I take up, President Baker and members of the board and Interim Superintendent Stafford. I truly believe, after having a number of conversations with people after the news release last Monday in the Columbus Dispatch, a number of people have begun to rally to say that they've not had an opportunity to have open forum, which these are all now been posted, and we've been giving information out to the community as to that, as it relates to that. We are concerned, of those that I've communicated with, they are very concerned about safety issues as the merging of these schools begin to take place. History in these schools have been long documented for the things that they have accomplished. Matter of fact, one of the presidents of the Columbus Public School is a graduate from one of these institutions. I won't mention an institution's name, but anyway, I think you know who that individual is. But the concern is that this is kind of fast track for some of them. Like the app, I can get it, but some of these people in this community are older people. They don't do the computer, they don't do the apps, but they will come out and they will address issues and concerns. So as you have these meetings at these various locations, like the one coming up here on Monday, these people will come out and they will begin to voice their concerns about safety of their kids going all the way across town, which means they got to get up early in the morning, maybe even a little earlier, to be bused. This community has had busing be a concern to them, and their children have been divided. And a community is only as strong as the people in it and the community commitments that they make. And we feel that this is a fast track, and we ask that rather than it being implemented within a year and a half, that you extend that to have further input from those citizens who are older citizens. We speak of this, but we forget that there are older citizens that don't do computers, may never have one. Some of them still have flip phones. So it is that consideration that I'm asking you to give and extending this review to allow these older individuals to come forward. They all are registered voters, and they probably voted for a number of you. So as the constituency has come forward to say, let our voices be heard, I ask you to allow their voices be heard so that some of these older individuals can come out and share with you their concerns for not only their children, but for their grandchildren. Education is one of the things that I've believed in all my life, and I will close with this comment. Our children are the seeds to the future. Their love will warm them. Their praise shall shower them. And education will make them grow. Give them the opportunity to have an input. Extend this review beyond the year and a half where implementation is going to be somewhat of a fast track, and let these communities and these senior citizens in these communities have that voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Are there any clarifying questions from board members for Mr. Kent? Clarifying questions, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Kent, for coming this evening. Do you represent an organization, perhaps a faith institution, or the area commissions?
I represent the Vince Ciccarello Scholarship Fund. I have been giving away $5,000 in scholarships to the seniors at Lyndon McKinley High School since his death in 2011. And every year, we award $5,000, English, science, math, and naturally, because of who he was, one to the girls' basketball and one to the boys' basketball. And those of you who knew Vince Ciccarello or know of him, you can imagine how he would feel right now if he were to be able to turn over in his grave and raise his hand and say, "You're closing the school?" I think he would be in opposition too.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kent.
Thank
for
you.
taking-
Last question. Just
Yeah.
Mr. Vice President, one.
I thank you very kindly. Mr. Interim Superintendent, is there a way for, if it has not coordinated already, is there a way for Mr. Kent to for us to procure some sort of list of contact organizations that might have deeper roots or more extensive roots in the community? Is that a possibility so that folks are
yes,
aware?
Yes. Matter of fact, there's an activity taking place. Reverend Troy's church is having a wellness walk this weekend up at Easton. And then after that, they are going to ask members of that walk to show up at Linden Recreation Center. And I think things will start around 1 o'clock, 12:30, 1 o'clock, and food should be ready around 2. We can just make sure you all get a hot dog if you come. But they will begin to rally to talk about what type of position they wish to take. I work with the Linden Fellowship Church, who is our fiduciary agent for the distribution of these funds to the seniors. And there are a number of individuals that are now, as I said, as the news release came out last Monday, a number of people are starting to ask questions. And these questions are very profound because they feel that this community has been under attack. When it was proposed to close once before, I did a news interview with Tracy Townsend at Channel 10, and we got some things addressed. And I think that with the current recommendations, I think that we have a preliminary that could mirror, like Hilliard Davison and some of those kinds of places. I think we have something that could mirror that, that would be in focus as far as creating a feeder program for an institution of higher learning as we have in our community.
I thank you, Mr. Kent.
Thank you, board members and Interim Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Mr. Superintendent?
May I ask? So when you say that do you guys have a proposal that you say will mirror Hilliard Davison? I just want to understand.
Well,
that
yeah,
part.
there are some things that we would, I mean, for instance, the Linmore property, right? When they first began talking about closing Linden McKinley prior to its renovation, we were talking about taking that Linden McKinley property, close it, move Linden McKinley to the Linmore property. Hamilton Elementary is a STEM academy school. You would then have an elementary school, and then Linmore could be retrofitted to be, once again, a junior high school, and a Linden McKinley would be on the property as a high school, allowing it to be a campus format where you have individual buildings for each grade level that you are recommendations on closing and moving and transferring. This way, the community would be intact. There would not have to be a lot of major crossing of major intersections, but you look at the Linmore property, which is about a $4 million+ property, not to mention what Hamilton Elementary adds to that cost factor. When you put Linden McKinley on that property, reopen Linmore as a middle school, and keep Hamilton Elementary as a STEM school. They're all individuals, and Linda McKinley could be built in a manner that it would accommodate the current numbers. At 53%, you're on the upside of the scale because you have 53%. You have a majority of what is 100%. You have 53% of that. So if you take that 53%, look at a plan that would put a building in place that would accommodate the current numbers, but also allow it to have the ability to be extended for further use in the future by having an addition. Like when they would build houses like in Whitehall, they built them for the guys in the air bases. But they built them so that if an expansion needed to be put on, it could be done extremely economically. And that is something that we need to be able to consider as we spend tax dollars and look at how they're spent and what they're spent for. So this consideration would make much more sense, and you could take McGuffey's kids, and the only intersection they would have to cross possibly would be Hudson. But then again, you have another elementary school over in that area, or at least you did on Clinton, I think it was, and I don't know if it's still operational or not, but that would allow the historical aspects of Linda McKinley, and it carries the president's name. So if you do that, you create an immediate feeder system on a single property. And the kids will not have to be bused, and they can walk, and they can do a number of things that they're not able to do now. And it would help the revitalization of this community, which is now undergoing some economic changes for the good. When you have kids in a STEM academy, these are not the kids carrying guns and pistols. They're carrying math books, science books, biology books, and they're looking forward to their futures. Unity is a factor. Unity is a factor. And as I say, our children are the seeds to the future. All right?
Thank you, Mr. Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Kent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. McCammon, you probably already did, but please note that Board Member Hudson has arrived. Thank you, sir. All right, let's then open the floor to my colleagues who do have questions about the presentation. So, Vice President Cole, I believe you were first.
Thank you so much.
I do want us to keep in mind that these are what I refer to as preliminary draft recommendations, and that we will have, we in the community will have additional opportunities on the 10th, 11th, 13th, and 20th to hear more and to weigh in. So we may not want to go super deep tonight because we'll have additional opportunity. And this does not necessarily represent the final recommendations that will come out of the task force through the superintendent to us. So having said all that, Vice President, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that clarity, Mr. President. Thank you so much, committee, for your diligent and hard work in particularly looking at the assumptions in a very categorical and bright way that helps you put this whole system into a deeper perspective. So thank you for that. My first question is, and this doesn't necessarily have to be answered tonight, this is more of a curriculum question as a result of use of space. In the Dominion move to what is now currently Columbus North International, is there an intention with that middle school to incorporate IB, to introduce an early IB, International Baccalaureate program that then those students could also utilize to move forward to high school and to that, and to the, what will they be international at Brookhaven? Will IB be a consideration for our students in that middle school situation?
Mr. President, Mr. Cole, since this is a curriculum question that you're asking, I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Academic Officer and allow her to take a first stab at it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, and good evening, board members. President Baker, to Vice President Cole's question, that is something that we have been discussing, looking at the logistics, looking at the cost and the benefit to that program. So that is something that we have definitely been discussing.
Awesome. My second question, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And if I may add on to that, one of the things, if I'm not mistaken, that we have proposed with that particular option is a year of planning with the families of the various schools that would be involved in that particular program to identify what would be the specific curriculum proposal that would be made as a part of that transition.
Okay, thank you for that. My second question is to the south side.
I love the fact that one of your assumptions, or at least one of your outcomes that you were looking at, was upgrading our middle schools. I think that's absolutely awesome. With that in mind, how does this improve the facilities, and how high on the priority list is the improvement of the Marion Franklin facility, so that we are prepared to accommodate those students who are transitioning over?
Mr. President, to Mr. Cole, I will turn it over to Alex Trevino, our Capital Improvements Director, to answer your question and jump in if I need to.
Yeah, President Baker, to Vice President Cole's question. So Marion Franklin has been one of our priority projects as it exists today. So we are just wrapping up the HVAC projects and electrical upgrades, which are the vast majority of the operation fix-it work that we have planned for that facility. We do have a few other more minor projects that we still have to complete at that project, like their plumbing upgrades, as well as asphalt upgrades, but the kind of lion's share of the work at that building is nearly complete at this point.
I thank you very kindly. My last is around transportation, because as we went through this presentation, I was definitely thinking and processing how this transportation situation could possibly work, particularly in Linden. What does that look like, if at all, if anyone can give explanation of that? Has there been any thought? I remember years ago when several of our students were attacked while waiting for the school bus. Some female students who were attacked. Is there a possibility of using some public spaces that where students might be able to congregate and wait for the bus en masse? Perhaps churches in the community, other public spaces. But what does transportation look like?
Mr. President, to Mr. Cole, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Oldham to answer that question.
Good evening. President Baker, Vice President Cole. So in transportation, as it looks now, because our transportation we have school choice, we look at each routing as they come in. However, we already utilize a model, if you will, where we do mass at like high schools for transportation, as well as some of our elementary schools. So again, we'll continue to utilize that model. But again, if you look at that, you talk about Linden McKinley in particular, you also look at in and out. And so a lot of those students going to Linden McKinley or away from Linden McKinley already use transportation. So it just really be looking at our current model and then also just revitalizing what we do now. But again, we also look at the opportunities where we can do major schools, major hubs, so we have mass people at those routes.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, and I do believe that Mr. Brown, you were next if you have questions.
Not questions as much as just a thank you, both to the internal team and to the citizens who participated in this process. I do have questions, and those can wait until we get more community input and until I've spent more time studying what we have. So that can wait, but I know you're not entirely finished, but thank you for all the work that you've done. I've been through this before, not on a scale as large as this, but I know it just takes a lot of good effort and time and persistence, and the perspective that all of you bring, being able to look at the entire district and being able to look especially the focus on how do we make education better for our kids, and the benefits that we can provide by taking steps like this are wonderful, and thank you for providing us the opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Peretti?
Again, I do want to briefly just sort of highlight some of the things that Board Member Cole had brought up about transportation. As we prepare to have these community events, to make sure we're talking about this, the impact on academics, what that's looking like, especially how that's going to be enhanced in certain areas. What additional things can we see? What things are going to stay the same? Questions like that families are going to have, and really just thanks to the work of this task force. It's a lot of work. This is part of a very large conversation that this board and district has been having for a few years now. When we originally started, shedding properties that we didn't need, and our specific levy requests for deferred maintenance, for our sort of permanent improvement piece, the different work that we've been doing in our finance committee when it comes to accountability and transparency, our various capital budgets, what we're doing to really set the stage for what we really need to do. This task force helping us realign the district, yes, it's painful, but at the same time, it's positioning ourselves for appropriate growth and to get to that point where we need, from the big 8 schools in this district, where I think we're last when it comes to renovations and rebuilds. And we as a district need to make sure that we have a process, a long-term process at looking at this. This isn't something that's going to happen overnight, but we have to get to a point where all of our buildings are in this position, because the buildings that we built most recently, some of them are getting close to 20 years ago, in the early 2000s, and we have to start thinking about that. But this has just been, a lot of different things coming together, and we touched upon it again with AC. Some of the buildings you just can't upgrade to AC. These are conversations that we have to continue to have, to talk to people, to really realign ourselves in that way. I think what I took back, what I've been thinking about much, is Ms. Sabady's comments on alternative funding. We automatically think, hey, we're saddled with this sort of situation that we have to go to the levy and wait for the state to give us our allowance, which changes every 2 years, which any private enterprise would never last more than 5 years with a revenue flow like that. But nonetheless, we're always trying to keep up with that, to try to explain to the public what the constraints really are when it comes to school building. That's why we need to make sure we have a long-term process. Again, real quick, we've even been talking about our NSDP charter and expanding that. That is really, I've been really encouraged by that. That creates a scaffolding for long-term examination by this district that goes beyond school board members and beyond superintendents, is in a process that we can have that is set in stone, that we can constantly monitor this, so as we come and go, that we have a system that is looking at our finances and our facilities, amongst other things. So again, just thank you very much. I really, the work that this district has done, this task force has done, it sometimes isn't very popular sometimes, but I think it's really putting ourselves in the right position. We've been working really hard, and you've been working really hard, so thank you very much. I appreciate everything.
Thank you, Mr. Peretti. Board Member Gibbs, I believe you were next.
No, I didn't raise my hand,
I just had a feeling.
but since you asked,
Yes, ma'am.
a couple questions here for you. Let me echo my sentiments to thank everyone who's volunteered their time and their talent and their energy to this process. It is but an arduous task, and I can only think about when you punt it back to us, how careful the deliberations still and must carefully be. And I echo the sentiments of my colleagues about the efficacy and the financial gains and the efficiencies that we will attain. But I can't help but focus on the children, on the families, and on the communities that we are endeavoring to serve, in some ways divide, and in some ways eclipse. But all endeavoring to serve better, but yet and still those things will occur. And the way we handle it and how delicate we are with that pencil and or knife is how many students we will have left after the process. I will say that I've been on the board long enough to close about 20, 30 schools. So this is not foreign, but I've also seen where one change of a building can absolutely shut down the pattern to a high school. So when we talk about moving middle schools in particular, our closure of Clinton had a negative impact on Brookhaven. Our closure of Berry Middle School choked out attendance to Marion Franklin. Our closure and movement in trying to push everything on Linda McKinley except what they wanted, which was vocational ed, caused them not to attend that school. So I don't take it lightly of what we're asking the community to do. So I will start with, Even though we have only given you a few days, please show up to the community meetings and please share your comments. And if in fact we get to meetings and there may be only 7 or 8, I hope that is an impetus for us to schedule another meeting, because I think it's very important for us to get this done, but it's even more important for us to get it right. And that these communities, particularly the ones that are going to have lasting changes on the way we decide to close schools, is going to be important. Our previous precedence was that if we moved you from one building, the new building will be better. And so as we're thinking about moving you from a building with no air to another building with no air, I'm challenged on the idea that that is better. That's my first part. On the idea of the continuity of our academic programs, and as you know, j'adore le français. So as we're moving our language immersion schools again for another time without addressing the absolutely academic integrity of that feeder pattern, determining the quiet efficacy and the demand of it, and giving it a permanent home, which we promised in the new buildings that we built for them as a K-6, although they have told us, and they told us before we started, they wanted a K-8. And yet again, we're moving them. And then while we're asking Dominion to rethink adding a program, I'm concerned that we didn't ask Dominion what they wanted, and that we're going to play stick the dealer and say, think about this, because this is what you're getting. So if we're going to have true, this has nothing to do with y'all. Y'all standing there, listen, these are just comments, y'all. We gave y'all the data and you consider what you've given. And this is a comment to the team that now has to consider their recommendations and what you take to the committee. And these are going to be, no point in waiting until October, because I'm going to have these same thoughts when they come back if they're not different. That we need to have, and everything can't stay open. We can't run empty buildings and have empty facilities, but people choose things for a reason. If we don't study the choice, it will be repeated and the next building will be empty as well. So we've had open enrollment for the better part of 10 years. And if students wanted to go the East, they could have. So I want us to study very carefully, forcing kids to go where they could have chosen, they could choose right now. And to make sure that we're not usurping the work and the energy and the momentum that is already happening with our major partnerships. So for that, I only have 2 questions. 2. One is in the Beery Opportunity Center, it was quite heralded when we opened it with the library and other partners. What happened to that center? So they had a library there, and we closed Beery, which is on the property. As we talk about being on property, is right next to Marion Franklin, but we added the library and some other things to it. So is the library still there? What happened to that center that now it is open to be closed? I guess that's my question.
President Baker to Ms. Gibbs. Currently, we have, as I think Mr. Varner mentioned in the presentation, we only have 1 CCS staff member at Beery. The library is still, we still have a lease with the library to run the library portion there. We have the Opportunity Center that is still operating there. I believe, as he mentioned also in that presentation, we're committed to continuing to work with them to try to, we're either going to maintain those leases or to try to help them find space that's more accommodating. But right now, we're operating a fairly empty building with 1 staff.
This later, but we didn't think to just reopen that as the Southside Middle School? It was a middle school, we closed it. Why did that not come as an option to reopen Beery, which is right next to Marion Franklin?
So Ms. Gibbs, at this point, that building has a significant amount of deferred maintenance that we would need to address before we would consider reopening it as a middle school.
Okay. My second question is around our process, and that people are going to have an opportunity to weigh in. What exactly are you going to do with that feedback? And most of our community feels like it's already a done deal. So are they open? Are you open to hearing scenarios or options? Because you have done an extensive amount of work on a ton of options, if we're, gonna keep it 100. We've already went through every scenario. So as we're approaching the community, are we educating them on what we are about to do? Or are we providing an opportunity for them to voice their objections so that we don't go against the grain of what the community wants? I think we need to be very clear when we go so the community has clear expectations, and so do we.
Mr. Baker to Ms. Gibbs, it's both. We felt very strongly that we needed to start with something, and that's what this committee has worked for the last 5 months to do. They put together, based on the data and based on the charge given to them by this Board of Education, a set of recommendations to start the process. Now, in this process, it's time for us to go out to the community and hear from the community. And so, just as Mr. Kent, I believe, yes, Mr. Kent, shared an idea with us tonight, it is definitely our hope that we get other suggestions and ideas as we go out and have these community forums. The only thing that I would that I would ask of the community, and as I ask of this Board of Education, as we go through this process, is to keep in mind what you just said, and that is, everything can't stay open.
Everything can't stay open.
Okay? That's the reality that we are faced with. And through this process, we're going to provide you, the data and the information that this committee, this task force, utilize to make the recommendations that we have presented to the board tonight. But understand that that's just not our reality, that everything can stay open the way it is. And so we have to make hard decisions as a community, and we have to make hard decisions as a staff and as a Board of Education. And as long as we keep that in the forefront, the best interest of all 52,000 students in this district, and understanding that when we have to operate buildings that are not at capacity, we are denying opportunities to those students. So as long as we understand that everything can't stay open, and understand that we have to make a decision that is in the best interest of this community as well, and understanding that every transition, every change requires, for us to work through those changes together. Those are the things that I would ask of this community as they go out into these forums.
Absolutely.
And be open-minded.
And to that point, thank you so much for rephrasing that as well. In your inputs, did you get information? I heard you mention a number of partners that helped us. And again, I'm telling you, absolutely thank you. Because those 5 months I know you did the work. But did we hear from the Community Shelter Board, the Homeless Family Foundation, the Columbus Police Department Gang Task Force? Who else did we bring to the table to help? And do we have some special meetings maybe for the area commissions that are in this impacted area? They are a different group of people that directly serve these communities. And I know it's a tight time frame, but quite frankly, we got to do budgets, but 5-year forecast is until May. So can we add the community area commission? And can you tell me about the other groups that also impact students that gave us input into the recommendations?
Sure. Mr. Baker to Ms. Gibbs, the answer is yes. Some of the members of the task force are members of area commissions in the city. The issue of did we reach out to like the police department? Yes, to discuss the safety issues. Mr. Ward, as you well know, has a great relationship with them and has the opportunity to have those type of conversations. Issues involving any sort of aspect of our student population was brought to the table by our staff. So in terms of trying to understand what impact these different ideas would have on our ESL population, our homeless population, our special ed population, our population, excuse me when I said that, our population with students with disabilities. All of those discussions were developed and discussed by our internal team and brought to the table before the task force when these options were presented to the task force. And as I said, even the task force members themselves had a tremendous amount of pushback on different ideas that were brought to them during the process. And so there has been a robust conversation internally and at the task force table about different ideas.
Thank you very much. I look forward to the community meetings and reviewing the set of recommendations that come to us. Thank you, President Baker.
Thank you, Ms. Gibbs. Board Member Reyes?
Thank you, President Baker. So I also want to thank you for all your hard work. This is never an easy task, and it'll only get a little tougher as we move along, as we continue to hear from our community about some of the proposed changes that are still not even permanent yet, but we look forward to hearing more. So my comments and maybe a question in here were also about when I heard Siebert, and we continually talk about people, the majority of the students that go there are people who chose to go there and not necessarily live in the area. We really need to understand why. When we've closed a couple of schools, that was very concerning when we heard from the parents at the time of closure, how they build a community and how they support each other and how they have a strong PTA. When we make the decisions to then disassemble that strength, it really hurts the district. So I know that should be something that should be taken into consideration, which takes me to my second point about as I looked at some of these boundaries in the map version, and Mr. Baker's going to love this because he's always been pro-neighborhood schooling communities, looking at some of these boundaries and ensuring that there is some sort of community. There's maybe one or two that I saw where there's some kids that are going to be way out on the outer boundaries. How are they, that if we're talking about students, how we incorporate them, how we build around them, is how do they become a part of that new community that we're going to be retrofitting them into? What is that neighborhood concept of it? How does it become a walking community and a working community together? I heard a lot about adding sixth grade and adding some maybe additional lotteried or wait list students into some of the proposed changes, especially the ECOL and the Spanish immersion. Are we also considering possibly pre-K and kindergarten in some of these areas? I'm assuming that's for you, Mrs. Gillison.
President Baker, and thank you for the question, Board Member Reyes. Yes, that is part of our discussion, but I will also go back to Interim Superintendent Dr. Stanford. We want to hear from the community and what's best for the community. So it's been said several times tonight that these are preliminary, and nothing is actually etched in stone. We want to hear recommendations from the community. We want to hear feedback from some of these options that are being provided. So yes, that will be part of the community discussion, and we'll listen to our community members, our parents, and anyone who would like to come out and share their views and concerns about the moves.
Thank you. Because I've also heard the feedback when we didn't do the pre-K-8 in those areas, especially the dual language schools. And I continue to see that because fortunately or unfortunately, I've recruited at least 6 students into that 2 or 3 of those schools, and I attend a lot of their functions. So I continuously hear from those parents that they would love for their kids to stay there. I'm also concerned about the long rides home. A lot of our kids, I think that's one of the biggest thing. So as we look at, I know we have to be economical as far as filling the buses and making sure that the buses are full to make it sense. I think we also need to make sure that our kids are not spending an hour, hour and a half, especially our little kids, going from one side of the town to the other side of town, even when they live in that same area. My other one is, how are we distributing this presentation to our students so that they can provide that to their parents? That's the first part of the 2-person question. So I don't know if that's our communications department. So are we distributing this I mean, we can, again, back it to our speaker's point of view. Not everybody sees the news, not everybody has the online, Facebook, social media, you know. And when we did public engagements, we tried to go mobile with our surveys, our parent surveys, and we had to go back to the paper concept because we went from and Director Johnson's laughing because she was on the committee when we did that. We went from, I think, 16% return rate in paper to like 2% online. So, and that was a drastic drop.
So President Baker, thank you. Board Member Reyes. So this is the beginning of that community feedback period. So starting today, we will be making sure to share all of that information through all the different communication channels that we utilize, both through our partners in the media. You know, you've seen reports on this in the newspaper and on every television station. You'll start to see it through all of our social media. But we'll be making sure to share that information through our school buildings, as many ways possible so that we can make sure that all of our communities have a chance to weigh in and provide feedback. Feedback then that will be given to the task force to allow them to understand what the community is saying. So not every member I know will be able to attend every community forum, and so how do we best capture what's said at each of those? How do we best capture the online feedback, the surveys, the emails, and make sure to share that with the task force? So the community part really begins today.
Will we be doing robocalls, letting parents know that these meetings are happening in their area?
I think that's a great idea that we can look at, yep.
Okay. Additionally, will we be, don't go away yet. Are we live streaming any of these meetings so that even though I cannot show up because I have transportation issues or any other issues, is there a way that we can live stream either not only through social media, because again, I talked about the difficulty. We have a channel that we own. Is there an opportunity to do a live feed at that time? Or I know that there may be some concerns of the whole delay and maybe people not using what they need to be using as far as language. But I think it's important that we, just because maybe I have a disability or I just can't get a ride, that we give all different types of accessibility, even if we have an additional meeting and it quickly goes on to Channel 25 or Channel 3, if Director Johnson can make that happen, so that people can see that during that week or 2 weeks that it's going on. Is that a possibility?
President Baker, thank you again, Board Member Reyes. So actually, as we looked at the community meetings, you'll notice that 3 of them are at school sites during the evening, our traditional time to have meetings. We also have a meeting here during the morning because we also know that we wanted to make sure to give an opportunity for those families, those parents, community members who may not be able to attend an evening meeting because of work or other obligations, our business partners who may want to be a part of that. At the same time, we've also had conversations, and I'll be working with our Chief of Staff to determine how best to do. We agree, we think we should do some sort of Facebook Live opportunity where we go through all the proposals and give opportunity for people to weigh in live. Now, I love your idea also about then somehow using that video and putting it on our Educable station. Probably can't do it live because of some of the technical difficulties, but that's one more way in which we can make sure people have an opportunity to see it. And as you know, what's great about Facebook Live, just as we have this meeting on Facebook Live and the number of people who are watching live right now, there are quite a few more people who watch it then immediately after and the days following. So that'll be a great opportunity to make sure that those same messages are carried through.
Just keeping in mind that we live in a district with a high poverty rate, the ability to, even if you don't work, the inability to get to somewhere is a challenge. My last question, at least for now, is when we start getting to the end of this process, my assumption is we're going to start looking at what would be the cost of all these moves and things that we're suggesting, because that's probably going to be a big portion of whether we do something or don't do something.
Mr. President, to Ms. Reyes, yes. Once we get further down the road, we'll be able to make better estimates. Really want to emphasize that even down the road, it'll be estimates based on estimates. And that's because, especially with our school building decisions, we won't know what the actual enrollment will be in those buildings until months later. Our first indication of what the enrollment may look like, of course, will be through the lottery system. And as a school district of choice, even though we may estimate a school may have 600 students based on attendance boundaries and all of that, because we are a district of choice, those 600 students may not show up at that building. So we can provide estimates, yes, but want everybody to know that there are estimates based on estimates.
And I lied, I do have one more for Alex. So Alex, when all these things come back to us, will there be a shift in the Operation Fix-It and allocated funds into some of these changes? And will we see that when the recommendation comes?
So President Baker to Board Member Reyes, so assuming that the recommendations were accepted as they were presented tonight, there would absolutely need to be some sort of modification to the plan. And so just to give an example, right now we have projects that are indicated for the Buckeye Middle School building that obviously we would not execute on if the recommendation was to close that building. And I'm sorry, was there a second question or a second piece to that?
Will it be included with our recommendation package once? So say you come back with, we get through this whole process, we get feedback, then the administration gets what the pre-preliminary recommendations. At that point in time, would you be able to come back and say, if you did this, then I would, just like you said, so now that this may be a possible recommendation, we would be able to affix these Buckeye expenses to add air conditioning to one of the recommended middle schools.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, President Baker to Board Member Reyes, we could certainly do something like that, and it might make sense in terms of looking at cost impacts, just to kind of put it into that same sort of a scenario.
Address maybe Board Member Gibbs' issue if I'm moving somebody from a non-air conditioned to a non-air conditioned, but I'm closing a school that was going to get money, I might veer in favor of that particular movement if you told me that school got me AC, and maybe a parent might be less impacted by that change. So, thank you.
Board Member Reyes, Mr. Vice President, and then final question to Board Member Gibbs.
Thank you. Very last question. Format for the community piece, for the community engagement, what does it look like? Is it a presentation with a Q&A? Is it some sort of hybrid that also provides a work session, opportunity for people to provide feedback that way? We utilized a really good model about 4 years ago with our Dreaming Big, Moving Forward piece in the community. What is our model that we're going to execute on those days?
This will be a similar format to the budget forums where there was a presentation so that we could deliver consistent information to everyone. And then the smaller group discussions where community members have the opportunity to sit in smaller groups and interact with our team members that can answer questions. We have found that people are more willing to share their ideas, solutions, when they can interact one-on-one with our team members as opposed to in a large group where you may just have opportunity for a few people to speak. So we look forward to, like you said, a hybrid with that presentation. The other thing that I don't want to get lost in this is the student voice, because often our students cannot get out of their buildings and get to the community meetings. So Mrs. Gillis and I have talked about deploying teams of our educators to our schools to sit down and talk with our students. We're making decisions about them, and we need to make sure that we have student voice that's included in the feedback and the recommendations. They often have very good solutions that perhaps we haven't thought about.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. President.
Board Member Gibbs.
Yes, and finally, thank you so much. To that point, have we visited, or is there an opportunity for us to do a ride-along, so where we visit all of these schools that we're impacting? Because I know, I'm from Columbus, so I know where these schools are, and some of these I've never been to. So I don't know if the committee offered or if they planned or had an idea that they would, visit Mifflin Middle and then drive to this proposed Medina site to see the community of where they're going to be impacted or where we're making boundary changes out west to find that dot on the end and then take that ride on a bus maybe. Maybe we do a bus tour. So we are actually in the buildings and see the facilities that we are proposing to change. I'm thinking that maybe, if you could do that for the board, maybe as we're considering whatever final recommendations you give to us, so that we clearly understand what this looks like. Because it's one thing on a map, and it's another thing when you're in a car in 3 o'clock traffic trying to come home and to see how long exactly that student is on the bus, or what that neighborhood walk is, or where Mifflin is and where Medina is, and the consistency of those communities and the Marion Franklin pattern. And some of those schools, although I've endeavored to go to every single one, I don't know everyone. So if you say you can move Watkins to here, I don't have a concept of what that's like until I get in a car and go from Watkins to Buckeye or Watkins to South. So I would ask in a very, very tight, very tight timeframe, President Baker, that we somehow come up with an opportunity to do that, so that, and we have time, not before your community forums, but before we make a final decision, we should absolutely see where these buildings are and who we're going to impact, and understand the changes and support why you can't walk across West Broad Street, and to understand some of those. But when we get to the more difficult decisions, we're going to absolutely need to see, and we have a model where we're asking people to come to us. But as we make these historic decisions, we're going to need to go to that community and to go to see those families and to see what we're asking them to do.
Mr. Superintendent, can you give some thought to how we might try to accommodate that request?
Sure, Mr. President, to Ms. Gibbs, we can certainly take a look at it. I think for the task force members, it would be a logistical challenge, given their schedules and given some of the certain regulations that we have about the use of our buses. With the Board of Education, it would be a little easier with some of those logistical issues, but even, trying to get on everybody's calendar to do it collectively could be a challenge as well. But, instead of using, and again, we would have to have more conversation about the use of transportation to do something like that, because there are certain regulations that we have to abide by that may not allow that type of use of our transportation vehicles.
We have amazing partners and churches. They got church vans just sitting there. And so through our partnerships, even if we got to hop on CODA, which some of our students have to do, I think we could go and see it, carpool, vanpool. And I'm not asking or trying to task the committee, because you already have a huge amount of work, but definitely welcome to join us. But before we make that final vote, I think that is something we should do, however we get there.
Let's give that some thought.
Yeah, I don't want to say yes, and I don't want to say no. We'll take a look at it.
Take a look.
Report back.
Yep.
Possibility of infinite possibilities. Thank you.
All right. Does that conclude questions from my colleagues? Thank you very much to the committee. And just as a reminder, September 10th, 11th, 13th, and 20th, and I know that our partners in the media will help us to publicize those dates and the locations for those meetings. Thank you very much. Thank you, co-chairs. Thank you, committee members. Thank you. Superintendent, does that conclude your report, or do you have more you'd like to share?
No, Mr. President, members of the Board of Education, that concludes the report for this evening.
Thank you very much. And let's move on then to the internal auditor. Madam Internal Auditor, have you a report for the board this evening?
Yes, I do. Thank you, President Baker, Vice President Coe, and members of the board. At the August 23rd, 2018 Audit and Accountability meeting, the committee received a status update on activity of the fraud, waste, and abuse reports received in their disposition. The committee also voted to release 2 of 4 reports presented. I'll start with a review of the Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Report overview. As you can see on the screens in front of you or behind you, reports are made through various sources. The preferred source is through the confidential third-party administered reporting system. A report can be made over the phone by calling 855-678-6764 or online through www.columbus.ethicspoint.com. And as you can see on the report before you, we received 11 web-based reports and 9 actual call-in reports. Next, we had people who called us directly, or they would send an email or a snail mail, and we actually had one person come into our office, and we are happy to accommodate all of the above. So altogether for FY18, we received 32 reports. Next, I'll go into the level of activity. If we can go down to the bar graphs. As we do that. Since the inception of Ethics Points in 2014, you can see that we've had as high as 58 reports and as low as 25 reports. And we are averaging around mid to low 30s. The reports also break down the types of reports that are made. The system can generate a multitude of data to analyze by location, region, function. But we thought this type of information would provide the most beneficial information at the board and committee level. But if additional information is requested, a report can be made. So as you can see, the report also, if you went down a little bit further, that's fine. The report also identifies the issue type, and also it shows the disposition of each report. So for right now, I will pause before I move on to a discussion about the audit reports.
Questions for the internal auditor on the fraud, waste, and abuse reporting system for our most recent fiscal year? Madam Internal Auditor, under results of referred reports where it says outcome not reported to your office, there are 5 of those. Tell us, explain that just a little bit so we know what that is.
What we do is, as we refer reports out, we ask that the person or the department who we refer the reports to just follow up and let us know, how the report was handled. And we have 5 of the reports that we referred out that we are still waiting to get input as far as, what was the disposition of those reports. So we haven't given up on getting that information. It's just as of the time of this report, we had 5 outstanding issues that we had referred out but had not heard back from the department as far as how they were resolved.
Thank you. I also note under issue types, there are 6 that are listed as other. Do you recall what they were off the top of your head? Not to put you on the spot.
All off the top of my head, I'm looking back to see if, Mr. O'Connor will come and try to answer that question.
President Baker, member of the board, good evening. 6 would be other areas that aren't categorized here. And the problem is if we start listing one at a time, the report just gets too voluminous. So we try to just categorize that and just put another category for anything else.
Do you remember the nature at all?
I do not.
Okay.
I apologize. I can get that information for you, though.
Okay. And you did present this report at the Audit and Accountability Committee meeting, and I know it was very well received by the committee. This is a great snapshot, I think, of the year of the reporting system. So thank you. Thank you both. If there are no other questions from board members on this particular report, please carry on.
Okay. As stated earlier, 2 of 4 reports were voted for release. The other 2 reports had significant questions to be addressed and will be presented again at our next meeting. So the first report presented and released was the Food Service Department report, was conducted with great cooperation from our Food Service Director, Joe Brown. Mr. Brown and his team were receptive to all recommendations and very patient with the Office of Internal Audit team. A lot of different areas were reviewed with 4 issues noted and 12 recommendations made to improve processes. The food service team provided steps and a plan to address all recommendations. At a later date, the Office of Internal Audit will perform follow-up procedures to determine the effectiveness of the new, revised, or enhanced procedures and report back to the committee and the board. The second report approved for release was the Position Controlled Process Report, which was conducted with a cross-functional team approach because of the wide swath of areas impacted. We worked with budgeting, human resources in the Treasurer's office, and once again appreciate the cooperation from all areas. This was the Office of Internal Audit's first time reviewing this area, and I think we all learned through the process. The report identified 6 issues and yielded 8 recommendations. Both reports have been forwarded to the board and are on the district's website for review. Mr. President, this concludes my report.
Thank you, Madam Internal Auditor. Are there any questions from my colleagues for the Internal Auditor? Thank you very much. We appreciate your report. Keep up the good work. Thank you. All right, let's move on to the Office of the Treasurer. Mr. Controller, have you anything to share this evening?
President Baker, I don't have a report, but I would like to recognize the passing of one of our staff members over the weekend. We lost Mrs. Ellie Arnold, who was one of our area treasurers in our Northland region. She served the district proudly for 26 years. Ellie will be dearly missed, and our thoughts and prayers go out to her and her family at this time.
Thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. I know that she had been sick recently, but kept coming back to work. So just an outstanding employee. Why don't we just observe a quick moment of silence? Thank you for that, Mr. Controller. That's the type of employee that we all want and need and aspire to be. So anything else from the Office of the Treasurer?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move then to item 8, Board Matters. We have a first reading of policy updates. I'd like to call on PRC Chair Brown to discuss those updates with the board. Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Baker. This evening, happy to report that the Policy Review Committee continues to chug along and work through a number of changes that are needed to policy. Most of these, like the first on college credit plus, simply needs to track changes in the law that have occurred. The other policies are there in the summary. 2271 is the college credit plus changes. 6233 pertains to amenities for participants at meetings and other occasions, and this policy tightens that up a bit. Recognition also tightens up and clarifies some language so that reasonable recognition can be given. And then finally, the utilization of the district's website language clarifies some things as we continue to improve the technology that we have. New questions arise. And finally, we have an amendment that adds the Policy Review Committee itself to the list of standing committees of the board. Something that I don't know whether it was overlooked or not at one time, but we're here now and plan to continue, and I think it'd be good to include that. These policies are all here tonight for first reading. If anybody has questions, concerns, please let me know directly, and I'd be happy to either answer or get an answer for you so that we can act on these. I believe on the 18th of September, I think, is the regular meeting at which we'll act on these. Questions now?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any questions? Okay, we appreciate your ongoing work on this, and that constitutes the first reading of policy updates. Thank you. Let's move on then to item 9, our consent agenda. Is there a motion that we adopt it as presented?
So moved.
Moved and
Second.
seconded. All right, discussion on any piece of legislation contained within the consent agenda this evening, colleagues. Hearing none, seeing none. Mr. Controller?
Mr. Peretti?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. And let's then move into announcements. Board members, I'll ask if there are any brief announcements or points of pride that you might like to share. I'm going to ask that you keep these comments to within a minute, and I know that the superintendent may have something he'd like to share with us as well.
Mr. President, members of the board, with that vote on the consent agenda, there are a number of administrative appointments, and these individuals are here this evening, unless they decided to leave, given the hour. But I think they're still here. And so I'd like to introduce to you the following 5 individuals who have joined our team to work on academic performance. We have Sarah Andres, who's coming to us from Wright State University. We have Philip Davis, who is coming to us from Sales Development Specialist at Kimball Midwest. We have Rosalind Ray, who's coming to us from RTAX Masters, LLC. We have Shatoya Wilburn, who's coming to us from A+ Arts Academy. And then last but not least, we have Catherine Wislocki. All right, got that right, from Ohio State University. And so I'd like to welcome them to the CCS family. We also have Jamal Ford, who is being promoted from Transportation Supervisor to Manager of Transportation Operations. And then last, we have Devin Reese, who is coming to us from Millennium Community School as an assistant principal. He will be middle school assistant principal at Ridgeview Middle School. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Now, board members, anything you'd like to share, Mr. Peretti?
Next Wednesday, the 12th, at 4, Finance and Appropriations will be meeting. We'll be doing our regular monthly financials. I think we're catching up a month as well, but then our regular pace for monthly financials, as well as the beginning of our conversations for a 5-year forecast. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Peretti. Any other of my colleagues have anything they'd like to share very briefly?
Thank you to the Greater Arts Council for their donation to the district.
Yes,
and
Mr. Vice
the countless others that have constantly donated and contributed to making sure that we live up to our mission statement. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to remind you all that Thursday, September 6th is National Read a Book Day. So everyone take some time, read a book, not because you have to, but because you want to. Also want to remind you that September 9th is a very important day, Grandparents' Day. So it's very important to thank grandparents for everything they do to support our spirit of success. We have grandparents who are raising our students and participating in their success. If you're a grandparent, raise your hand. Okay. Okay, very good. If there's nothing else, I will now, I know you are, Mr. Brown. Did you put your hand up?
Yeah, but I don't think much of the day.
You're a grandparent every day. Keep up the good work.
Every day is Grandparents' Day.
Good man. All right, with that, I will call upon the Vice President to offer a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is recommended that the Board of Education recess into executive session per Section 121.22G1 of Ohio Revised Code to consider the employment or compensation of a public official or employee.
Moved and seconded. Controller?
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes.
Mr. Peretti?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Sure.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. The board will now recess into executive session. We'll adjourn from those chambers without returning to these. Have a good evening. Thank you.